There's a particular kind of stillness that people mistake for laziness. Not the calm kind, not the restful kind. The kind that shows up when you sit down to do what you should do, and nothing in you moves toward it. Your mind can still list the reasons. Your calendar can still make the demand feel urgent. Other people can still call it simple discipline. But inside, there's no spark, no pull, no internal yes. And because we've been trained to worship motivation like it's a moral trait, the first thing you do is blame yourself. You tell yourself you're slipping. You tell yourself you've become weak. You try to push harder, as if you can intimidate your own system back into desire. You try to manufacture drive the way you might force a door that used to open easily. But motivation doesn't disappear randomly. It doesn't vanish as a punishment. Most of the time, it leaves because it no longer recognizes what you're asking it to carry. There's a difference between low energy and misdirected energy. Low energy is depletion. Misdirected energy is something else. It's the feeling of having enough life in you to worry, to overthink, to feel restless, but not enough life to commit to the old path with sincerity. It's like your system is awake, but it won't sign the same contract anymore. The mind doesn't like that kind of refusal. It needs a simple label so it can stay in control. So it calls misalignment lack of discipline. It calls evolving falling off. It calls inner disagreement procrastination. Anything that makes the refusal sound like a character flaw rather than a signal. And when you try to force motivation from that place, resistance increases. Not because you're broken, but because your nervous system can feel the lie. Forcing yourself toward what no longer fits doesn't create drive. It creates friction. It creates that heavier, thicker exhaustion that comes from doing something you don't believe in anymore. Sometimes the most honest thing your system can do is become unmotivated. Not unmotivated in general, unmotivated by what once pushed you forward. Because what pushed you forward before may have belonged to a version of you that no longer exists. That's the part people don't want to face. The uncomfortable truth that goals can expire, not because you failed, not because you weren't strong enough to finish them, but because your identity evolved quietly while you were busy chasing them. A lot of goals are not truly about the goal. They're about who you needed to be when you created it. The proving, the escaping, the surviving, the need to become someone worthy, the need to earn love, respect, security, permission. Goals are often tied to a past self like a rope tied to an old dock. At the time, it felt like direction. It felt like purpose. It gave your days a shape. But growth can quietly invalidate old ambitions. Not dramatically, almost politely. One day you look at what you've been chasing and you can't feel it. Not because you're ungrateful, because it no longer reflects you. That's why success can feel empty. The achievement lands, and instead of satisfaction, there's a strange neutrality. Like you reached the place you were supposed to want, and the part of you who wanted it isn't there anymore. The applause arrives, and it sounds distant. The reward is real, and still it doesn't activate anything inside you. This is not a failure of gratitude. It's an identity mismatch. And when identity shifts, the nervous system starts telling the truth before the mind can explain it. You might notice that external rewards stop lighting you up. Praise feels thinner. Recognition doesn't provide the same hit. Even money, status, the image of being on track, loses its ability to wake something in you. It's not that these things are meaningless in some abstract sense. It's that your body no longer believes they will give you what you were promised. There's a simple way the brain works that can feel almost cruel in this phase. If a reward stops feeling real, your system stops mobilizing. It's not philosophical, it's biological. Motivation is not a command you issue. It's a response your system gives when it expects something meaningful at the end of the effort. When the effort is rooted in pressure, approval, or fear, it can work for a while. It can create a kind of surface momentum, but eventually, the nervous system gets tired of being bribed. It stops responding. It doesn't matter how many plans you make. It doesn't matter how many productivity tricks you try. Discipline begins to fail when meaning is gone. because discipline alone cannot convince your body that the reward is worth the cost. This is why you can't motivate a nervous system that no longer believes in the reward. You can only exhaust it. And that exhaustion often gets mislabeled as weakness, when it might be the first sign of an inner intelligence coming back online. This is where emotional resistance becomes important, because it's easy to treat resistance like an enemy, something to crush, something to eliminate. But resistance has different origins. Sometimes it's fear, sometimes it's avoidance, and sometimes it's honesty. There is a kind of procrastination that is not laziness. It's inner disagreement, a quiet refusal to keep building a life around something your deeper self has stopped consenting to. Avoidance can be a signal, not always a signal that you're scared of success, sometimes a signal that the goal itself is no longer true, that your system is refusing to keep pouring life into something that would cost you your integrity. This is why pushing through feels heavier than stopping. Stopping feels scary because it removes your narrative. It removes the identity of the one who's striving. But pushing through feels heavier because, in some subtle way, your system recognizes you would be betraying yourself to continue. And self-betrayal has a weight. It accumulates, even if you don't call it by that name. So you end up in this strange place where you want to be motivated, but you can't fake belief anymore. You want to feel driven, but the old fuel doesn't work. You want to go back to the version of yourself that could chase things cleanly, but the attempt feels hollow, like trying to restart an ambition that has already died. This is usually when people try to adopt new goals too quickly. They sense the old ones collapsing, and they panic at the empty space. They reach for a replacement the way a person reaches for noise when silence becomes too revealing. A new project, a new identity, a new obsession. Something that restores structure before truth has finished surfacing. But clarity doesn't always arrive immediately after letting go. Often, it doesn't arrive at all in the form you expect. There can be a psychological silence after ambition expires, a gap, a stretch of time where nothing feels compelling, and that feels like failure if you've been trained to equate constant striving with being alive. This gap is not failure, it's transition. It's the moment after a door closes and before your eyes adjust to the new room. It's the sediment settling after years of constant motion. The water looks unclear for a while, not because something is wrong, but because everything that was suspended is finally allowed to fall. This is why patience matters here, not as a virtue, as protection. Because the temptation in the gap is to rebuild the same cycle with a new label, to pick a goal that feels acceptable and chase it the same way, through pressure, approval, or fear, just to escape the discomfort of not wanting anything yet. But if your system is refusing old motivation, it may be refusing the entire architecture that produced it. And the refusal isn't weakness, it's self-respect trying to emerge, not loudly, not as confidence, as a quiet boundary, a silent no where you used to force a yes, a subtle unwillingness to keep living out of borrowed reasons. If this is where you are, then the lack of drive is not the whole story. It's only the surface symptom of something deeper rearranging. Your energy hasn't disappeared. It has stopped feeding what once pushed you forward. And the uncomfortable part is that, for a while, it may not feed anything at all. Not because you're stuck, because your system is no longer willing to pretend. And in that gap, the mind tends to do something almost automatic. It tries to reanimate what has already expired. It goes back to the old goals the way someone goes back to a childhood room after years away, expecting the same feeling to be waiting there. It tells itself, maybe you just need to restart. Maybe you just need one strong week. Maybe you just need to remember why it mattered. Maybe you're being dramatic and you should simply get back to it. But when you actually try, it's not the same. The old ambition might still be intellectually coherent. It might still look impressive on paper. It might still make sense in the language of success. And yet, emotionally, it feels like pressing on a dead button. You can force movement for a moment, the way you can force a smile for a photograph, but it doesn't generate real energy. It generates strain. And that strain is information. Because what you're running into isn't a lack of discipline. It's the emptiness of trying to chase something you no longer believe in. This is why going back feels impossible now. Not because you've become incapable, because your system refuses to lie. Nostalgia is what the mind uses here. Nostalgia arrives dressed as loyalty. It says, "You used to want this. You used to be this kind of person." It says, "Don't waste what you built. Don't let it all be for nothing." It says, "If you leave this behind, you'll have to face the unknown, and the unknown feels like losing everything." But nostalgia is not always love. Sometimes it's fear wearing a softer mask. Sometimes it's the mind trying to keep you familiar, because familiar feels safer than true. And in that gap, the mind tends to do something almost automatic. It tries to reanimate what has already expired. It goes back to the old goals, the way someone goes back to a childhood room after years away, expecting the same feeling to be waiting there. It tells itself, maybe you just need to restart. Maybe you just need one strong week. Maybe you just need to remember why it mattered. Maybe you're being dramatic and you should simply get back to it. But when you actually try, it's not the same. The old ambition might still be intellectually coherent. It might still look impressive on paper. It might still make sense in the language of success. And yet, emotionally, it feels like pressing on a dead button. You can force movement for a moment, the way you can force a smile for a photograph, but it doesn't generate real energy. It generates strain. And that strain is information. Because what you're running into isn't a lack of discipline. It's the emptiness of trying to chase something you no longer believe in. This is why going back feels impossible now. Not because you've become incapable, because your system refuses to lie. Nostalgia is what the mind uses here. Nostalgia arrives dressed as loyalty. It says, "You used to want this. You used to be this kind of person." It says, "Don't waste what you built. Don't let it all be for nothing." It says, "If you leave this behind, you'll have to face the unknown." And the unknown feels like losing everything. But nostalgia is not always love. Sometimes it's fear wearing a softer mask. Sometimes it's the mind trying to keep you familiar, because familiar feels safer than true. And the more you try to restart expired ambition from that place, the more exhausted you become. Not the clean exhaustion of effort, the kind that comes with satisfaction, the heavier kind, the kind that leaves you irritated with yourself, or numb, or strangely resentful of the very thing you're forcing yourself to pursue. That resentment is not a moral flaw. It's your deeper self refusing to cooperate with a story that's over. You can still perform the old drive, but performance is not motivation. Performance is pressure. It's important to notice that your resistance here has a different texture than ordinary fear. Fear can be loud, urgent, cinematic. It can try to pull you back from risk. It can create fantasies of failure. It can tighten the body and accelerate the mind. But what you may be feeling now is often quieter, a flatness, a non-response, a lack of internal ignition that doesn't come with dramatic panic, just a steady refusal. That refusal can look like procrastination, but it isn't the same as avoidance of difficulty. It's more like avoidance of falseness. It's not, "I'm scared to do it." It's, "I can't pretend this is mine the way it used to be." And this is why the gap phase is so psychologically disorienting. Because in the past, even when you were afraid, you could still want. Want is movement. Want gives identity. Want gives a reason to wake up and push. When want fades, the mind starts to feel as if it's losing itself. But the absence of goals isn't failure. It's transition. There's a kind of silence that follows the collapse of old ambitions. Not the peaceful kind at first, the strange kind. The kind where you wake up and the usual internal pressure isn't there. And instead of relief, you feel exposed, as if the voice that used to drive you has gone quiet, and without it, you don't know what to do with your own day. This is where people often rush to adopt new goals too quickly. They pick something that sounds aligned, something that looks healthy, something that would be socially approved, and they chase it with the same underlying machinery, the same need to prove, the same fear of being nothing without striving, the same pressure to be impressive, certain, productive. They change the label and keep the contract, and the cycle repeats. Because what's being asked of you here isn't a new goal. It's a new relationship with goals. A goal is not just an objective. It's a psychological agreement. It's a statement about what you believe will make life feel worthwhile. It's a bet your nervous system is willing to place with its energy. When that belief changes, the agreement dissolves. You can still say the words, but the body doesn't sign. This is why discipline stops working when meaning is gone. Discipline can move you through discomfort. It can't move you through internal disagreement forever. If the deeper self doesn't consent, the effort becomes self-violence, and eventually, the system refuses. You might notice that your mind keeps demanding proof before it offers trust. Proof that you're not wasting time. Proof that you're still on track. Proof that you have a future. Proof that you're not falling behind. Proof that you're still the kind of person who can build a life. But proof doesn't arrive on schedule during this phase. And if you require proof before you allow honesty, you end up trapped. Because the honesty is what creates the conditions for real clarity, not the other way around. Clarity often comes after honesty, not before. That's the paradox most people struggle with. They want to know what the new goal is so they can let go of the old one cleanly. They want the replacement first. They want certainty before surrender. But the new goals don't appear while you're still pretending the old ones fit. The system can't move toward what's true while you're still feeding what's expired. So the gap lingers, not to punish you, to protect you from repeating the same cycle. Real motivation is a byproduct, not a command. It's what happens when your nervous system believes the effort leads somewhere worth going. It's what happens when the reward is not applause or approval, but internal coherence. When the goal feels like an extension of who you are now, rather than a correction of who you fear you might be. This is why aligned goals create a different kind of energy. Not always louder, often quieter, but steadier, less dramatic, less dependent on mood, less dependent on external validation. You don't need to whip yourself into motion because the motion is natural. It doesn't mean it's easy. It means it's not internally resisted. And that's the key distinction. Difficulty is not the same as resistance. Difficulty can be clean. Resistance is heavy. Difficulty asks for growth. Resistance asks for betrayal. Your body can tell the difference even when your mind can't. When you're misaligned, even simple tasks feel like carrying stones. When you're aligned, even hard tasks feel like carrying something you chose. The danger during the gap is assuming that because you can't feel aligned yet, you never will. Or that because motivation hasn't returned, it's gone permanently. But motivation isn't a personality trait. It's an outcome of relationship between you and what you're pursuing. When the relationship changes, the response changes. This message isn't here to criticize you for not being driven. It's here to name what you already feel but might be afraid to admit. Your old goals don't fit anymore, and new ones can't appear until you stop pretending they do. That doesn't mean you stop living. It means you stop forcing. It means you stop using shame as a substitute for direction. It means you stop recruiting panic as a motivational strategy. It means you stop treating the gap like an emergency that needs to be solved immediately. Because the rush to solve is often the rush to repeat. There is a kind of discipline in not returning to the old patterns. Not because you're trying to be virtuous, but because you can feel the cost now. The cost of chasing out of pressure. The cost of working for approval. The cost of building a life that looks right while feeling wrong. Your system is becoming harder to deceive. That's not a problem. that's a threshold. And if that's true, then the lack of drive is not the end of your story. It's the end of a particular kind of fuel. The fuel that once pushed you forward when you needed to survive, when you needed to prove, when you needed to become someone. That fuel served a purpose. It got you here, but it can't carry you into what comes next. So if you're sitting in this strange place where motivation feels absent, where old goals feel dead, where trying to restart them feels empty, there's something quietly honest about that. Your system isn't failing to cooperate. It's refusing to cooperate with what no longer reflects you. Motivation returns when alignment does. Not as a dramatic rescue, not as a sudden personality upgrade, but as a steady willingness to move again when the direction is real. And until then, the most important thing you can do is not interfere by forcing yourself back into a goal that belongs to a version of you that has already ended.